Hello and welcome back to another episode of Cyber Voices, the official podcast of the Australian Information Security Association, otherwise known as AISA. I'm your host, as always, David Willett, and it is my pleasure to have you with us as we explore the diverse voices of the Australian cyber industry. Welcome back to Cyber Voices live backstage at CyberCon Canberra 2025. I've always wanted to say that, by the way. Like, we're backstage. Sounds very exclusive, very VIP. I'm joined by two very special guests today. I've got Anika from Downer and Annie-Mei from Securus. Welcome to Cyber Voices.
Thank you for having us.
It's great to have you. So you've just come from your talk here at CyberCon. Was this a first time speaking together or speaking at all at CyberCon?
First time speaking together.
Yeah.
First time for me as well. And
second time speaking at CyberCon for me. I spoke last year at Canberra as well.
Incredible.
Yeah.
So how have you how's it been having CyberCon here in Canberra? Because as an ex-Canberran myself, we didn't really have events like this back when I lived here. So how's CyberCon been welcomed in the community?
Yeah, I personally, when I first started in cybersecurity, this was probably the first conference I ever went to.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I've always really enjoyed it. It's also kind of a nice way, especially when you haven't seen people for a long time. You can always just bump into people that you haven't seen for a while.
it's my first CyberCon ever. And it's good to see people that I know from other places and from the AWSN, the Australian Women in Security Network,
Mhm.
but also people that came here from Melbourne and Sydney that I only met online.
So you've just come off a talk. Now, I loved the title of your talk, by the way, Revenge of the Nerds, but there's a bit more to it than what sort of meets the eye there. Can you tell me a little bit about what the talk was?
Yeah, well, I guess I'll go first because I did the first half of the talk, and then, Annie can go through the rest of it. Yeah, so our talk was basically, we kind of started thinking about this last year, just in personal discussions that we had about, I guess like issues that women have in cybersecurity. Just, the fact that there's only 17% of women in the industry is obviously a problem in itself. But it was more also the fact that, we started thinking about we go to a lot of women in cyber or women in tech events, and it just feels like we're talking in a little bit of an echo chamber. And to actually talk about it with everybody, to have men involved too, to actually talk about what the issues are. And so, the first half of the talk was more looking at that, the evolution of nerds and looking at the history of it and the kind of like the evolution of people starting to use the internet and, and how this like kind of hyper masculinity dominates the kind of narrative as well. And so, that's kind of how we kind of built the whole talk around that, and then looked at the case study, which was of Taylor Swift and the AI deep fake generated porn that was circulating online early last year. So that was the case study we looked at, but it was also looking at, what is the definition of cybersecurity? And how does is there an overlap between cybersecurity and e-safety, or are they separate?
So we started talking about it because I work in cybersecurity, but I also study criminology and cybersecurity. And I read Kevin Mitnick's autobiography for one of my essays for crime theory. And I studied crime theory and feminist crime theories. And for that assignment, I examined it through the lens of feminist crime theory, which was quite a unique look into it, but it made so much sense to me. And so I literally said to Annie-Mei, and I said, look at all this stuff that I have found, all this research online. So Revenge of the Nerds narrative specifically is actually like a scholarly research that is being done by masculinity researchers because of the movie Revenge of the Nerds. So it starts from there, like from the pop culture, but it looks at the progression of the nerd from maybe like starting at like 1980s towards where we are now. And we talked about the concept of hegemonic masculinity, which maybe for your listeners, hegemonic masculinity is a type of ruling masculinity that dominates all other types of masculinities, but also women as well. So it went from someone like Rambo or Arnold Schwarzenegger, and then Bill Gates became the wealthiest man in the world in 1995. So the status of the nerd went from like marginalized to implicit, which is the next level up. And then now we're having a culture of oligarchy, all the events that happened since we have submitted for this talk, we're like, oh, that's perfect. That's giving us so much more.
Yeah, it does seem very timely, given
timely.
what's going on in the public discourse, especially overseas right now.
Yep.
You talk in the description for your talk, it mentions a particular topic, or a term you've used, which is cyber heroism.
Yep.
And the role that is kind of, and is that kind of what you're thinking in terms of that, how that nerd is evolving and how the nerd has kind of become the hero a little bit? Like, how's that playing out?
For me, do you know about the sheepdog, sheep and wolves?
No.
Okay, so we haven't talked about it in the talk. I think I've left it out. Didn't have the time. But essentially, I think it's in a movie, maybe Taken or something like that. That says like some men are sheep, some men are wolves, and some men are sheepdogs.
Mm-hmm.
So sheepdogs are essentially like sheep, but they can use violence to protect others.
Of course.
Yes. And so that's kind of what comes to me to mind, because sometimes when we think about cybersecurity and technology in general, technology is not neutral.
Mm-hmm.
It's created in a biased world, in a world where hegemonic masculinity, the triangle that I've just described, where everyone tries to climb that status ladder, exists and persists, and women are left with it. So no matter how good you are, you're not even in the game to start with. And what happens there is that someone says, well, I am willing to use violence in order to protect people.
Mm-hmm.
But what actually happens with sheep in real life is that they are more scared of sheepdogs than the wolves.
Okay.
Because the sheepdogs remind them of the wolves, and they don't see wolves as often.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, like, rather be a llama, because when llamas hang out with sheep think that they're one of their own, but llamas also protect them because apparently they go mental. And so they really hang out all together. So you don't have to use violence, I guess, to create a culture of security.
Mm-hmm.
If that's how I can sum it up. And what we have done as well is we've examined the language that is being used in cybersecurity. And we examined it through that, I guess, your maybe savior complex or hero perspective, but also that hyper-masculine perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we talked about penetration testing.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, like, as a young woman coming into the industry, the first time I heard penetration testing, I just went, that can't be real, you know? And also the fact that we have vulnerabilities that are considered to be extremely bad. You never want to have vulnerability, right? You want to uphold your status of impenetrable, I guess. And I said, well, why do we have to have language like that?
Yeah, it's so harsh, isn't it? Yeah,
why? It's not necessary. And so it gatekeeps women out of the industry, which goes really well with the gatekeep nerd that you talked about in it all. And because they have their own niche, basically, like that nerd masculinity have their own niche of what it means to be a nerd. So like, I was a nerd, I was bullied in school, but that doesn't count because I'm a woman. So like, it's not a thing. It only counts if you're that certain type of a person. And it keeps women out of the industry. And women that do get into the industry, there was a research from RMIT that found that they leave after 4 years. And even if they are in the industry, they're being pushed to areas that are not technical.
How do we change some of this language, though? Like, is this just, are we starting the conversation now to try and really get people to think differently around how they approach cyber? Because I know from my own experience, like having worked in the industry since the mid-2000s, the term cyber heroism that you have in there really resonated with me, because I can remember reporting to CISOs and heads of IT security who were very ego-driven, and everything was about fear and trying to, manage through panic, and everything's scary. And I know when I became a CISO myself, I was like, I never want to be that person. I don't know if it's just because I'm a gay man or whatever, but like, I just don't seem to have that ego drive in that kind of way. But sorry, back to my question, like, how do we change this language?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because someone actually asked at the end of our talk, it was not about the language, but also about culture, about it for an organization. And I think it really does start at the top. Someone who's starting, say, it doesn't matter whether it's a small or a big company, but whoever's at the top, it really trickles down, from that kind of senior management level all the way down to whoever's down the bottom. And I made the point that I've worked at quite a few different companies and I feel like the companies that I've had the least issues at are the ones who never talk about this DEI initiatives because they don't need to. because the place is just a nice place to work and everyone treats each other how they would like to be treated, and it doesn't need to be spoken about. But then on the other hand, I've worked at places that have been quite toxic, where that they've, really pushed that as an agenda, and you see it in all their marketing, like, we really care about having equal women and men in our workforce, blah, blah, blah. And it just feels like when they feel like they need to say that, it feels like that's just hiding under what's actually happening underneath. And I feel like, especially with when a lot of reports and stuff come out, like I know recently there was the one that showed the salaries across different industries and how women are predominantly underpaid in a lot of different industries, include obviously especially in tech and more tech, I guess, like where there are a lot of technical people within the industry.
Yep.
But yeah, and then again, it goes back to the kind of language that you use for people. How are you speaking to them?
Do you think there's a need that maybe the industry needs to not take itself so seriously?
Yes,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. I think also, because I guess also a lot of people who come into cyber, say from maybe non-tertiary backgrounds, they've kind of like self-taught and stuff. And there's kind of like this aspect of, it's a kind of bit of like the Wild West in cybersecurity. Like you can kind of pave your own way. I think maybe that's changed a bit over time, whereas now it's a little bit, there's a lot more like professional organizations, stuff like ASA, for example.
I think language I think it's easier to start with because it's just so in your ears, I guess. Yeah, and also words, for instance, like vulnerability, and as you said, don't take yourself so seriously. I haven't mentioned it in the talk, but I've kind of examined it from the point of hegemonic masculinity and how boys are being radicalized from a very young age to struggle and strain. And I read a really good book by Bell Hooks about the will to change recently, and it's an old book. It's like from 2004, but everything is just so relevant. Says a lot. And basically, he says how we need to show empathy towards everyone, all of the genders. So both men, women, elderly, children, everyone is a victim of cybercrime. And if we didn't take ourselves so seriously we need to protect ourselves from the outside enemies and started actually looking at the people that are sitting next to us, people that are in our households, people that we don't know actually. And instead of saying, well, I am a cybersecurity person, hence I know everything about cybersecurity and I will continue talking in language that doesn't make sense to people, it gatekeeps people away, let alone not letting them in the industry. It's actually making us less cyber safe as well. Yeah. And so to change, well, I think it does start at the top, but it also starts from each one of us as well. The top will lead. And as you said, when you became a CISO, you said, I don't want any. I don't have that ego. And that's excellent because we need more. And like you, well, we need every person like you essentially to come forward.
Thank you.
and use your platform. Use your platform of leadership to be able to I guess, promote that message and promote equality and different language. But also people like me and people like Annie-Mei and our friends that maybe not even in cyber, and being nicer to them and being empathetic to them. That's why we had started our podcast and the things that we do outside of work to democratize cybersecurity for people.
Yeah, of course.
Because it's about people's safety.
Yeah, and it's about making it accessible too. Which is why one of the reasons why we started our Instagram page was because I feel like we who work in this industry, we know we know what risks there are to having the same password for everything, for example, not having MFA enabled. But the average person doesn't know that, and that's not necessarily an issue, but it's more, okay, well, how can we teach them to change those habits? And so I think, it's about actually, like you said, like taking the initiative to actually show people like, hey, we can actually teach you about this stuff, but in a way that's fun and a way for you to engage on like a platform that you would use on a regular basis, like Instagram, for example.
I wonder what you feel about like the importance of young people coming into the industry and the attitudes that they're going to bring, because the sort of people I was talking about before, they're the real old school, they probably consider themselves the pioneers of cybersecurity and to be honest, like back in the day, if I can use that term, it was a bit of a secret society. use a Harry Potter term, we didn't want the muggles to come in.
Oh, that's brilliant.
We really didn't, right? And it was people hiring, their mates and, this bloke used to work for me, he's top bloke, get him into the job, that kind of stuff, right? And I can see a lot of young people coming in now and they've got such different attitudes towards it. And they're coming into it for different reasons. They're studying it in university, which we weren't doing before. And there's all kinds of things happening now around just the sheer amount of work and roles that there are. So how do we kind of get to them and stop them from being sort of tainted by the older culture that exists?
Oof.
Yeah.
Tough question.
I feel like, it's funny because I feel like I've worked with a few Gen Zs and I feel like they seem a lot more just aware of like different, like you say, like I feel like, it is a generational thing. So I feel like, there's, like you said, that kind of nepotism that happens, like, just hire your mates. And I've seen that backfire so many times. Like, you shouldn't just bring your mates into your work.
Yeah.
And I've seen that not even just in cybersecurity, but in like even when I worked in hospitality, like, I used to work with this guy at this bar, come work for me.
Of course.
And it's just, it's never, just because you might have worked together well in one place doesn't mean that's automatically going to translate to another place, and people change, and also in different environments they can behave in different ways too. So I think it's interesting. I think I'm pretty hopeful.
I was very hopeful until I started studying and researching this topic around masculinities. And I think what happened after the Me Too movement is that there was a really big push for feminism, which was awesome. And a lot of women came forward and finally all of these systems broke down, the systems of secrecy.
Of course.
Cyber, right?
Yeah.
And there was, and now I think what is happening is that big pushback against that. And in a way, men are wondering, what does it mean to be a man? And that's absolutely fair. I absolutely understand. Feminism provided us with so many opportunities. It literally told us that we can be anything as women. And we believe that. But not me and Annie-Mei, but there isn't a way that was provided, I guess, for men. And so we see this spike in the manosphere radicalization of men, and especially after COVID and the pandemic, that didn't help at all. And we can see that there is more sentiment towards violence against women, amongst young men, and radicalization. And that literally research that is so recent from 2024 after the Bondi Junction attack, when Australia questioned, why isn't that classified as terrorism? Why aren't we actually considering misogyny to be, radicalization and terrorist threat? And our government and policymakers are aware of it. They could be more aware. They could be say it louder. They could be actually calling it out, because the only way to break the systems of secrecy is continuously calling it out. That's the only way that something can happen. And yes, I am hopeful that with the US going the extreme way that they're going now, it can actually put things into perspective for a lot of people and say, well, if this is what it looks like, maybe I don't want to be that. However, I still think we have a lot of work to do.
I agree. And an old friend and mentor of mine said to me very recently, especially with all the good work that we've done in diversity, equity, and inclusion over the last few years, I thought we're, in the space where I come from and for a lot of people where, all of a sudden there is this platform and a voice and a push to make everything just fair and equitable, but there's this pushback from it. And it's almost becoming quite popular in some places to push back against it. And so this friend and mentor of mine, she said to me, this is going to be a hard year for us, right? And it's going to take a lot of courage. And, I've found myself that, to even kind of put something on LinkedIn that's kind of like pro DEI, I'm a little bit, I hesitate a little bit. And I'm like, no, I've still got to do this. We still need to double down. And I think we'll especially see it from, the organizations out there who have touted how wonderfully DEI they are. And I know I should stop using the acronym, because I feel like the acronym is now almost being made a dirty word. It's the ones who are doubling down now who are like, okay, cool. You are truly living this, right? And, we need to sort of see that safety. And, I think that there are voices like ours, which are going to be really important to continue that. So thank you for bringing this topic to CyberCon. I did want to touch on one last thing from your talk as well. It was something that you brought up earlier, which was around, you mentioned the stuff around deepfake pornography and cyberbullying and online. Now, I wanted to just unpack a little bit more what you were talking about around how the rise of sort of cyber heroism and the hypermasculinity in the industry has kind of blinded us a little bit to some of the more important elements, more human elements of cybersecurity that we don't get to see. Would you mind kind of expanding on that part a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. I feel, and I said it with Kevin Mitnick in the talk, being technical is very important because being technical is the nerd masculinity part. And so everything that is like around human is not very technical. So for instance, like when we talk about training and awareness, or, if we talk in an organization, it's like we need to make sure that people are aware. It's always receives a bit like less budget and a bit less, it's like looked down upon. But when we have like a brand new shiny tool, or we're implementing this technological prevention, then it looks, people are paying a lot of attention to it. So yes, there is definitely in cybercrime policing, which is an area that I researched that kind of led me to this as well. We also are paying less attention to cyber-enabled crimes, which are the human factor crimes. So are they against humans? So the way that the nerd masculinity shuns the human away actually makes it much worse. Or the crimes against people, which is like cyberbullying, as you mentioned, or the deepfake pornography, and AI-generated crimes as well, which is on such a big spike now, to a point where people are not reporting it. It's extremely underreported. So someone that studies criminology, I see this history repeating itself because, again, we are not addressing it properly. And now we have this opportunity because it's not new and fresh, obviously, but it's newer than your terrestrial crimes. And we can say, well, there is hate crime on the internet. There is a lot of hate speech on the internet. There is sextortion. There is bullying. There is like scams like pig butchering and very sophisticated scams where it becomes like organized crime, right? And can we please look inward? Can we please look at our people instead of just focusing on data breaches? I'm not saying not focusing on data breaches. That's very important. But we also need to develop a proper response to this, to enable people to come and report this to start with, so we can have the data, so we can examine it and see what's happening. That's step one. But also what we are talking about, and having the grassroots movement and actually addressing all of the things that are biased in the industry, biased in cybercrime and e-safety, and bringing e-safety to be a part of cybersecurity. That's how we do.
Yeah, but I think it also includes what I was talking about in the talk as well, which is this divide between, is e-safety part of cybersecurity or is it separate? And I talked about some research that was done at the University of Sydney Business School, where they interviewed cybersecurity experts across different industries, like finance and transport and infrastructure and energy. They were asked things like, what is your definition of cybersecurity? And for most of them, they agreed that cybersecurity is the protection of data and the protection of information, but there was a clear divide between whether they thought it included the protection of people. And most of the men said that this tended to, that was in the sphere of e-safety, whereas the women tended to say that there was an overlap between cybersecurity and e-safety. And so I think, even just looking at those cybersecurity experts, if they can't even agree upon what is the definition of cybersecurity, how are we supposed to communicate that to the wider public? And how is the everyday person supposed to understand what cybersecurity is? And, they also, these experts also agreed that cybersecurity shouldn't be defined by this hacker in a hoodie image, but they didn't know what it should be, what imagery should be representing cybersecurity. So I think that I found that research really interesting because, if we can't even decide that now, like, how can we move forward?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So one of the last things as well, and I just wanted to loop back right to sort of something you said at the beginning, which is, about how we advance this and how we make it better, because it's, there's all these wonderful support groups, for, like you mentioned AWSN and all that. And AWSN does fabulous work. I've had Jackie on the show before, and I've taken on interns who've come through the AWSN mentoring program, and it's such wonderful, important work. But you mentioned as well, and I get involved in this sometimes as well. You get involved in your sort of special interest groups and support groups, and then you are in a little bit of an echo chamber, right? So how do we use these and break out of our echo chambers a little bit so that everyone, men, women, are all involved in the discussion about how we actually advance this in the right direction?
Yeah, I mentioned this as well because I had a male mentor a few years ago who told me that he wanted to speak at one of these events, and he had been told by this organization that they don't allow men to speak at their events. And when he told me that, I was quite shocked because I thought, well, that's discrimination in itself.
Yeah.
And also, shouldn't we be making sure that everyone is involved in this conversation? And also, I feel like if you have a male speaker as well on a panel that might be predominantly women, but having that male speaker also encourages other men to attend because if they might know him or, they also might think that there'll be other men present. And, for us, we go to a lot of events where we will, like I said earlier, you go into a room and you're the only woman there. And it is intimidating. And so I would imagine it would be the same vice versa. So, and I think, it's about making sure that everyone is able to have a say, and I guess making sure, and I think we even talked about this on a recent episode of our podcast where we were kind of debating about, what is the point of International Women's Day? Because you just feel like you're talking in this echo chamber. How do you actually encourage men to see this as an issue that affects them as well, not just us? So I think, it's making sure that that everybody understands how this impacts us as a whole, rather than just impacting half. Well, it's not even half, less than 20% of us.
Yes,
in the industry. Yeah,
I think of it as similar to how I've run like a lot of LGBTQI ally training before, right? And that's just about equalizing the language and normalizing things and just helping people understand, how they can do better, right? And it's not about having to watch yourself or watch your speech or anything like that. It's just about education, understanding people making a commitment to want to do better. Like your mentor who wanted to speak at that event, right? He wanted to demonstrate his allyship, I guess, in a way, right?
And also I feel like he had gone to a big effort to make sure that there were females in his executive team.
Yeah.
They weren't just at the lower level, but they were also represented at the higher level, which I think is actually more important because in cybersecurity, there's very few women that actually make it to that level. Like you said, the average is 4 years in the industry for women. So you're not going to make it to that level if you're only hanging around for 4 years.
I just wanted to add to that it's awareness and education, but also a lot of empathy, because I think, and I've met a lot of women, and I was a very angry woman as well at the, not just the industry, in general. It's difficult. It's difficult to be from a marginalized.
Yeah, I think sometimes that anger can be justified.
Yes,
you know what I mean? Yeah.
But it was making me feel really bad as well. So it was destroying me as well from the inside. And I found it to be very useful to have empathy towards everyone because, and I'm a feminist, very proudly so. I do believe, how you said with DEI, that feminism kind of, got the same reputation.
Yes,
maybe we need a different word, but feminism for some reason became this kind of like a punishing thing. And we don't come from a place of punishment. We just want people to be cyber safe. We want everyone to enjoy working and enjoy being on the internet. Yeah, the human rights, right? And that's where we're coming from, because everyone suffers from this. And sometimes I guess people forget about it and they get very angry, and it can be a very unwelcoming place as well. So you can be the only man there, and let alone that you are the only man, everyone is also very, unwelcoming. And I just call to everyone, both men and women, to be as open and empathetic and welcoming towards each other as possible.
And finally, tell us about the podcast. What's it called? Is it out?
Yeah, we first recorded it end of last year.
Yeah.
But we released the first episode in January. So the podcast is called Lost in Cyberia. And basically...
Is that spelled like Cyberia? Yeah.
Yeah, otherwise that would be a bit random, yeah. Yeah, but yeah, it's just us talking. But we actually just recorded our first episode yesterday with our first guest.
Incredible.
Which is exciting. So, and I guess I think we're still figuring out what direction is going to go in. You know, initially we thought, maybe this will be aimed more at cyber people, but I think now we're almost thinking like it's actually more. We've had a lot of people message us about who looking to transition into cyber, and it's more of a kind of educational and I guess like understanding what it looks like to work in the industry, what are those kind of pathways they can use to get into it. But it's kind of like a whole range of things, really.
Yeah. I do improv comedy, so I shared a link to the podcast with the people, and they are a whole bunch of different people in different careers. And some of them are like, I'm actually learning stuff, and this is great. And so, yeah, we're also representing the women of cybersecurity and the faces, I guess, of cybersecurity, showing that there is diversity, people think differently, and trying to, simplify it and bring it to the people, whether they want to break it into the industry or they were just always scared to ask, what is MFA? We are there for them, hopefully. Yeah, but kind of still trying to find, I guess, that exact objective, but in those areas,
yeah. Well, congratulations on the podcast. That's a really big achievement. So I've really enjoyed this conversation, so thank you so much for offering up your time. I won't take up any more of it. I'll let you go and enjoy CyberCon, but thank you so much for sharing your voices with us today.
Yeah, thank you
for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Cyber Voices. Our music is by Sanar Garut, our show artwork is by Studio Quarantine, and we record our show at This Is a Studio in Pran, Melbourne, part of Popplant Productions. Please make sure you follow the show on your podcast platform of choice and leave us a 5-star review. This will help others find the show. Also, please follow the association on LinkedIn and Instagram. If you want to add your voice to our ever-growing chorus of diverse cyber voices, have questions, feedback, or would like to be a sponsor, you can do so by emailing us at cybervoices@aisa.org.au. That's cybervoices@aisa.org.au. Are you an AISA member? If not, you should consider joining our network of over 12,000 members across Australia. An AISA membership can open doors, build professional networks, create lifetime friendships, and offer exclusive training, events, and other perks. Become a member today by heading to our website at aisa.org.au. That is all for today. I hope you will join us again next time on Cyber Voices.